In today's episode, we are going to look at the strange and interesting birth of Athena. How exactly did the goddess of wisdom come to be? And what does her rather unusual birth tell us about her character and domain? Will we get to the bottom of this today? Let's find out. According to Greek myth, Athena was not born in a natural way, but instead sprang fully grown and armored from the forehead of Zeus. But why did she come from there? Well, it's because her father had swallowed her mother Metis, the Titaness who personified wisdom and strategy. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did Zeus manage to swallow a full-grown goddess? Well, see, Metis could change her shape into that of a fly or a horse, among others. And it was in one of those forms that Zeus managed to catch her and eat her. Now, according to Hesiod, Zeus knew that Metis was destined to bear a child who would be wiser than him. So he did what any reasonable person would do in that situation and just ate her. Another version says that it wasn't Zeus's fault. He had actually gone to the Oracle of Delphi to ask who he should marry. And the oracle said that he should marry Metis, so he went ahead and married her, but then regretted his decision and decided to trick her. He changed her into a fly and ate her, but she was of course pregnant with their daughter Athena at the time. After swallowing Metis, Zeus began to suffer from horrible headaches, which is kind of funny to think about, since this is obviously not something that happens to gods very often. In fact, even the Titans, who were made of solid stone, could crack when they got a headache, like in the case of Cronus. But Zeus was not made of stone, but of flesh and blood, albeit divine flesh and blood. And so when the pain became too much for him, he went to the blacksmith god, Hephaestus, or the Titan Prometheus, depending on the version, and asked them to split open his skull. And that is exactly what they did. So the two of them split open Zeus's skull, and out came Athena, fully armed, wearing her famous helmet with its terrifying Gorgon face. She rode forward on an olive tree, accompanied by an owl, and she was clad in armor that was the product of Hephaestus's craft. There are other versions where Athena appears holding a shield and a spear. So now you might be asking yourself, why did Zeus have to get his head cracked open? Why couldn't Athena just be born the usual way? And what does her birth from his head mean? Well, first of all, this myth is yet another example of how the Greeks believed that wisdom is born from the mind and not the womb. For them, the mind was more important than the emotions, and women were seen as emotional creatures whose minds were inferior to men's. Remember that Athena was born from the mind of Zeus, and she was born fully grown, already knowing everything. There was no learning period. She just popped out of Zeus's head and was immediately considered an adult. And this ties back into the Greek idea that true intellect comes through struggle and sacrifice, and that it is the divine spark that truly matters. And Athena's birth from Zeus's head embodies that. It shows that it doesn't matter if you're born into a family of heroes and gods. If you don't have the divine spark, you won't amount to much. Now, some people might say that Athena coming from Zeus's head has nothing to do with women at all, and that we shouldn't read too much into it. But remember, this story comes from ancient Athens, which was a society that valued logic over emotion, reason over instinct. So it makes sense that they would have a story about a goddess of wisdom being born from the mind of the greatest god instead of the womb of a woman. But this myth also tells us something about Zeus. Even though he was the supreme leader of the cosmos and the father of gods and men, he was still willing to listen to an oracle. And this is very telling because it shows that he knew there was someone out there who was smarter than him. He may have been the king of the gods, but he was still willing to learn from others. And that is a quality that we should all strive for, no matter how smart or successful we think we are. Another thing that this myth tells us is that Athena was born from Zeus, not a woman, and this reflects the patriarchal values of ancient Athens. Women were considered to be inferior to men in terms of intelligence and power, and this is reflected in the fact that Athena was born from the mind of a man and not the womb of a woman. Women were seen as being too emotional and irrational to be able to produce a goddess of wisdom. Only a man could do that. There are some scholars who believe that Athena's birth from Zeus's head was an allegory for the birth of civilization itself. For the Greeks, civilization was seen as being brought to humanity by Athena, and this myth reflects that. Athena represents order and civilization, while Zeus represents the more chaotic forces of nature. The birth of Athena from Zeus's head could therefore be seen as representing the triumph of order over chaos, of the rational mind over the natural world. This story also speaks to the birth of a goddess without a mother. Most goddesses in Greek mythology had mothers, but not Athena. She was simply brought forth by Zeus on his own. This could be seen as a reflection of the ancient Athenians' view of women as being inferior to men. They didn't need a woman to bear Athena for her to come into existence. She could just be brought forth by Zeus on his own. This is also interesting because it means that Athena is one of the few major goddesses in Greek mythology who is not connected to a particular place. Most goddesses were associated with a specific place or region, but not Athena. She was a goddess of the polis, the city-state, and she was associated with all of the cities in Greece, not just Athens. Despite being a goddess of wisdom, Athena was also a warlike goddess. She was the patron deity of many cities, including Athens, and she was known for her strategic brilliance in battle. However, despite being a fierce warrior, Athena was not a goddess of brute force or bloodshed. Instead, she represented strategic warfare, and she was always on the side of justice. She was also a goddess of crafts, and she was known for her ability to inspire craftsmen to create beautiful works of art. Athena's birth was a truly unique event that set her apart from the other Olympians. It was a clear sign that she was destined to be a powerful and important goddess. In fact, it could be argued that Athena's birth was the most significant event in the Titanomachy. Athena was the first of the second generation of gods to be born, and she was the only one to be born without a mother. Her birth also marked the beginning of the end for the Titans. It was a clear sign that the younger gods were rising up and that the Titans' time was coming to an end. Her birth is a symbol of the dawn of a new era, an era of gods and humans who were more intelligent, more civilized, and more advanced than the Titans. This is reflected in the fact that Athena was born with a helmet on her head, a shield in her hand, and armor on her body. She was a warrior from the moment she was born, and she was ready to take on the Titans and help the younger gods win the war. Another interesting thing about Athena's birth is that it was a violent event. She literally burst out of Zeus's head, and that is not something that most people associate with birth. But this violence was not gratuitous. It was necessary to symbolize the struggle that is inherent in the process of bringing new life into the world. Athena's birth was not easy. It was a painful and difficult process, but it was ultimately successful, and that is what matters. However, the pain and difficulty of Athena's birth were not just symbolic. They were also a reflection of the pain and difficulty that is inherent in the process of becoming civilized. Civilization is not easy to achieve. It requires hard work, sacrifice, and a willingness to change. But the benefits of civilization are great. It brings with it the ability to build great works of art and architecture, to develop complex political systems, and to live in large dense communities. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Athena's birth is that it was a completely unexpected event. Nobody saw it coming, and that is not surprising given that Athena was a goddess of wisdom. She was known for her ability to plan ahead and strategize. She was not impulsive, and she did not do things without thinking them through. That's why it was such a shock when she suddenly burst out of Zeus's head. It was a reminder that even the most powerful and intelligent beings in the world are not immune to the surprises that life can throw at them. As I mentioned earlier, Athena was one of the most powerful and unique of the Olympian deities. Her intellect was unmatched, and she was also the only major goddess in Greek mythology who was born without a mother. This made her a truly powerful figure, and she was one of the most popular goddesses in ancient Greece. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, courage, inspiration, civilization, law, and justice, strategic warfare, mathematics, strength, strategy, the arts, crafts, and skill. She was also the patron deity of several cities, including Athens, and she was known for her strategic brilliance in battle. And there we have it. Those are the main points regarding Athena's birth. What did you think about this episode? Did you find it useful and entertaining? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to stay in the loop and be notified when new videos come out. I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.